Hey everybody, it's Ricardo Gorski, the founder of Offplan.One, where we build Cyprus's future together. And this is probably the most important video I did on the Cyprus real estate market in a long time, because this is affecting everyone that is interested in buying a villa here on the island. Why? Well, because you have about 4 months left to buy your dream house here in Cyprus for just 5% VAT instead of an astonishing 19%. So in June 2023, just about 3 years ago, there was a massive VAT reform that led to the fact that a lot of buyers and properties will soon lose access to the 5% VAT that is associated with the purchase price. Meaning many properties and most villas will have 19% VAT instead of 5%. And this will easily increase the total property prices by up to 6 figures, which we will see in examples in just a minute. But first, let's answer the question, what is or was the 5% VAT rule in the first place? And for that, you need to understand that every new property that you buy from a Cyprus developer is plus VAT. So the prices that you see in the brochures is plus additional VAT that you pay to the Cyprus government. And here you previously had a 14% discount that you got from the Cyprus government on the first 200 square meters of a property without any price limit on the property, which is going to be important in a minute. The only real conditions that we had back then was it must be your first primary residence here in Cyprus, so the first property that you buy here on the island, which could be reset every 10 years. So if you bought a property in Cyprus more than 10 years ago, you can apply for the 5% once again every 10 years. And second condition is you must live in that property theoretically. Practically, it means you shall not rent it out for 10 years. This 5% VAT scheme was approved and granted by the EU to help individuals and families here in Cyprus to buy the property that their family will live in at a lower price. And this made Cyprus one of the cheapest places in Europe to buy a property relative to the value that you get. However, as there was no price limit at all for the 5% VAT, it was used for many luxury mansions, penthouses, seafront properties, which basically was exploited by high net worth individuals as per EU. And so they wanted to restrict this scheme, which then led to the VAT reform in June 2023, which started the transition phase. As the EU pressured Cyprus to reform the 5% VAT scheme so that rich people will not use it for their mansion in the mountains or by the sea anymore, Cyprus implemented a 3-year transitional system, which is currently still in place. Meaning from June 23 until June 26 this year, there are still some properties and villas out there that applied for the 5% VAT before October 23, because just until then, all the planning permits that were submitted can still enjoy the 200 square meter and no price limit rule. But again, very important, only until June 15th this year, and after that only the new rules apply, which are the following. So we have new size and price limits, which I'm going to explain simply just because there are so many minor details and little things that need to be taken into consideration that are also very individual, which is one of the reasons why we always advise to book an individual consultation call with us on Offplan.One. But in general, what you need to know is that the reduced 5% VAT will still exist, but it will have much stricter limits. And those limits are, first of all, the 5% VAT, which again will still exist, will only exist on the first 130 square meters of the property. Every square meter after the 130 square meters that are eligible for the 5% will be taxed at 19%. But that's not it, because the total size of the property can be a maximum of 190 square meters now, while at the same time the value that is eligible for the 5% VAT is limited to just 350,000 euros, which was limitless before the changes. Just as the total property price of the property was also irrelevant, but is now limited to 475,000 euros. So just below €500,000. And if we think about it, this is basically a very beautiful 3-bedroom villa that you can get here in Cyprus. And so we see that the Cyprus government now makes sure that this is not exploited by super rich people for their extremely big villa with golden marble and Italian furniture and whatever there is, but this is now really just for the average family and person, which this 5% VAT rule was created in the first place many years ago. And to understand this even better, I now prepared 3 examples of properties that we regularly work with. The first one is a normal apartment with, let's say, less than 130 square meters. So we have a 120 square meters apartment, 2-bedroom, somewhere here in Paphos for 300,000 euros, so could be even 3 bedrooms. The developer submitted the permits before or after October 23, and it doesn't really matter in this case here because the VAT outcome is the same regardless. So the entire apartment qualifies for 5% VAT, and the VAT payable is 15,000 euros whether or not the developer submitted the permits before or after October 23. Why? Well, because the apartment is under 130 square meters, we do not reach any limits with the old rule, obviously, but also not with the new rule. Also, the eligible 5% VAT is for less than 350,000 euros, which is one of the requirements, one of the new requirements that we just learned earlier. And the total property value is under 475k, which is also one of the new requirements that we just learned. But now I would argue that such an apartment with 120 square meters is not really a property that a 4-head family would live in. So those example 1 apartments are rather investments. But remember, investments are not eligible for the 5% VAT rule because you are not allowed to rent it out. So let's look at example number 2, which is, by the way, the most common property type that we are working with at Offplan.One, and that is a beautiful 3-bedroom house with 160 square meters for a beautiful price of 420,000 euros. And here, now it's getting interesting. The developer submitted the permits after October 23, so as per new rules. And it's getting interesting now because the VAT regulation now works as follows. First of all, the good thing is the property value is below 475,000 euros, so the reduced VAT will still apply. It is not abolished completely, which would be the case if it would be, let's say, 500,000 euros. Then no 5% VAT would apply at all. But because it is below 475,000, it applies partially. And here is the VAT calculation, how it will work. So the first 350,000 euros will be taxed at 5% VAT, which leads to 17.5k in VAT that you need to pay. The remaining 70,000 euros, which was not taxed yet, will be VAT taxed at 19%, which leads to 13.3k. And as you see, the amount is so much less. We are talking about 70k compared to 350k, but the actual VAT that is payable is so close. I mean, 17.5 and 13.3k, which shows you how much of a big difference 5 and 19% VAT actually does. And so the total VAT payable on this medium-sized house is 30,800 euros in payable VAT. But now listen carefully, because remember, the permits were submitted after October 23. So what would happen with the VAT if the permits would be submitted before October in 2023? And that is that the 5% VAT would be applied on the full 420,000 euros, because the 350,000 euros limit, which is this one right here, wouldn't apply, and the total VAT payable would be just 21,000 euros, which leads to a VAT difference of 9,800 euros. So almost 10,000 euros just because the developer submitted the permits before or after October 2023. So what will happen to medium-sized houses is that we will have these mixed VAT calculations as we see right here. And after the transition phase is over, these calculations right here with 5% VAT on everything will not apply anymore, because we will have the 350k limit. But okay, it's 10,000 euros. It's not like hundreds of thousands of euros, which I mentioned earlier. So let's look at example number 3, which is a big dream villa here in Cyprus. And we are talking about a 3-floor house with a big rooftop, a huge pool, an unobstructed sea view, a luxurious interior, huge ceilings, and a lot of glass. Basically a villa that a lot of people are dreaming about, me included, by the way. And guess what? The prices for such villas here in Cyprus are actually not that high. I mean, here we have, for example, a 190 square meters villa. And the beautiful thing we did for this specific client and his beautiful villa is that we worked hand in hand with the architect, the construction company and the development company to use the basement for 2 additional 1-bedroom apartments that are not in the planning permits. So on paper we are talking about a 3-bedroom villa, but in real life it is a 5-bedroom villa for a price of just 900,000 euros, which is obviously the off-plan price. But the buyer bought this property more than 2 years ago, so now it is already ready and he secured this villa at an extremely low price. Market value now, I would personally guess, is at least 1.4 million. So he enjoyed a huge capital appreciation just by buying the property and waiting 2 years. And in addition to that, he also enjoyed the 5% VAT because the developer submitted the permits before October 23. The VAT outcome today, or back then, but also today, if you were to buy this property, is that all the 190 square meters still qualify for the 5% VAT, and the entire villa is taxed at this low VAT rate, which means the VAT payable is 45,000 euros only. But now let's look at how much VAT this client or you, if you buy the same priced villa, would pay if you will buy after June 26. So after the deadline, after the 5% VAT rule has been officially reformed, and after this discount from the government is gone and the guaranteed 14% capital appreciation is also over. So the VAT outcome after June 15th will be that the old rule no longer applies and is not available anymore on properties worth more than 475,000 euros. And so the entire property will be taxed at 19%. No 5%, no partial VAT, no mixed 5 and 19%, no, just 171,000 in payable VAT on your dream house just because you didn't buy before June 15th. Isn't that crazy? We are literally talking about a difference of 126,000 more in VAT payments for the same villa. And this is not an idea or a proposal or a myth. This is literally going to happen. Just Google it, just look up the newspapers, just talk to anyone that is associated with the Cyprus real estate market, and they will tell you that this is not just true, but one of the biggest, if not the biggest change for everyone that wants to buy a new property here in Cyprus. And actually, I would argue this is not just affecting off-plan property buyers, but the whole market and everyone, because this actually leads to a butterfly effect. And so the question is now, what does this mean for you, for the average person that maybe wants to buy a property but is not 100% sure yet? And the answer is, unfortunately, that if you would ever consider buying a big villa, myself included, then we will not enjoy the 5% VAT at all, because our property will be worth probably more than 475k. Number 2, if we were to buy a medium-sized, average, normal house, or maybe even a penthouse here in Cyprus, or a bigger apartment, then we will have to pay split VAT, meaning the first 350k will be 5% and everything above that until 475 will be 19%. If the property is more than 475, then 19% on everything. And 3, most apartments that you will buy here in Cyprus actually will remain unaffected, just because the total property price is not that high. But again, this is not really for primary residences, it's more for investors, and for those people you're not allowed to rent out the apartment anyway, officially at least. But anyway, the most important things now, very important for you to know, and that is, yes, you can still get the reduced 5% VAT if you act fast because we see a huge spike in interest for the last 5% VAT villas just because we have a guaranteed 14% capital appreciation. I mean, if you buy a big villa for, let's say, 1 million on June 14th, then this property is realistically and factually worth 14% more 2 days later. And so if you are thinking about buying a property here in Cyprus, make sure to save your property and the 5% VAT by reserving it before June 15th. Because as said earlier, I am telling you, the real estate market here in Cyprus has been changing for many years and is going to change even more. It is so fast nowadays. There are so many people that are interested in Cyprus because we already see the effects and aftermaths of this VAT reform on a daily basis. For example, developers now focus more and more on apartments because they are still eligible for the 5% VAT, and developers care about selling as fast as possible. And if the clients see 5% compared to 19%, they obviously tend to take the 5% VAT option. It's just much less risk for the developer compared to a huge mansion with 19% VAT, where it obviously takes much longer to find a buyer for. Which is also tied to the next point, which is developers reduce the average size of houses here in Cyprus. And this leads to the fact that there will be a special market for such big villas, like example number 3, which will somewhat create the Bel Air or the Hollywood Hills here in Cyprus, where there are only large, huge mansions and villas for a specific clientele, which is not going to be sold very often, but every now and then, just because it is so prestigious and more rare. But also it will lead to more renters and fewer buyers. Why? Well, because it obviously takes much more liquidity to pay 14% more for a big house. So instead of buying a 2 million euro seafront property and paying this amount of liquidity now, I maybe just rent it for 20k per month. And so I'm definitely curious how this will change the Cyprus real estate market over the next few years, how this will unfold, how the prices will change. But what I'm 100% convinced is that Cyprus becomes more and more expensive in general. And if you ask yourself now, this VAT change doesn't seem to be good, is it even still worth investing in Cyprus, or am I too late, the typical investor mistake? Then I have to tell you, no, you are not too late. We are still so early, and Cyprus is still this hidden gem in the Mediterranean Sea, and it still falls under the radar of most investors. And so if you are seriously interested in securing the 5% VAT on your property purchase here in Cyprus, then make sure to reach out to us on Offplan.One, and we will speak about your investment very soon.